Hello, my name is Corey Engelot, and I want to share with you a little bit about my political beliefs per se, which I would say are not very political as you may think, because a lot of what I talk about on my channel may be considered political, and people have many questions to ask me. So in this video, I decided, well, why not discuss some about these questions and really get clear what is it that I truly represent on behalf of my soul, on behalf of who I really am deep down inside as a person who follows nature and reason as their guide. So when it comes to politics, the first assumption a lot of people may ask of me is, well, are you a libertarian? And my simple answer to this is no, because all politics, whether it's Republican, whether it's Democrat, whether it's libertarian, all of it basically leave out morality. Morality is not even discussed. Everything that they talk about is usually about legality. Now, if it's talking about social issues, I wouldn't consider it political. Political to me means usually voting people into office, having to do with ballots and elections. And that is not universal ideas. They're not timeless ideas. They're not the ideas that I want to focus on. They're not the ideas that really matter. Because at the heart of everything is morality. Everything is a moral issue. I've had many conversations where people ask me these questions, and every time I'm able to deduct it to a point where they try to limit me in doctrines and boxes, and I say, you can't do that because I'm a human being. And I recognize that I am because I haven't put myself in any box to recognize or to title myself, to put myself in any special identity. So what about communism? Oh, we got to fear about this ideology, and this ideology is nice. What about that ideology? What are your thoughts on that? Irrelevant. Again, doesn't talk about morality. What system of morality then am I under, right? That's the other question. They say, okay, morality is your guide and you like morality a lot. So what is your system of morality? Like they're basically assuming that I have to be under some sort of system of morality. Well, again, can't answer, basically irrelevant. Because I can ask them the question, well, is violence wrong? Okay, most likely they say yes. If not, then they have some sort of faulty reasoning. Okay, and I can only try to convince them, but that means that there's something going on within themselves. Well, what about involuntary interactions? Is involuntary interactions wrong? Okay, well, if we can agree that violence is wrong and involuntary interactions are wrong, then we got a pretty basic morality, which is that of which I hope all people would have. And that's what I appeal to. I don't appeal to, is it objective, is it subjective? This is all irrelevant. What's relevant is that we all share the common understanding that violence is wrong. So we need to take that to the next level and say, well, who does the violence and why do they do the violence, right? That's the big question in the room. Why would someone commit violence on someone? Well, okay, it could be some faulty reasoning, but it could also be under the case of, let's say, authority figures, that they can commit violence to help prevent violence. In order to create order, they need to tax, they need to steal money from others by the threat of violence in order to fund the rest of the town. They use violence, and yet it's seen by everybody as legitimate. That's why everything comes down to morality, because anytime we're talking about politics and voting someone to office, we're essentially saying that they get to impose their will on others. Is that moral if you agree that involuntary interactions are wrong, or that violence is wrong? Because if it's involuntary, it's also a form of violence, right? You're violently imposing your will in order for it to be, by definition, involuntary. Does that fit me under the box of voluntarism and agorism and anarcho-capitalism? No, none of that matters. It's completely irrelevant, and all it does is put us in different boxes, makes confusing statements, and then somebody hears capitalism and they automatically think communism, and they start talking about economics, and they completely stray away from morality. This happens all the time. I see it in conversation all the time, and so people get frustrated because they don't want to talk about morality. They want to talk about the things they feel comfortable talking about, which is these manifestations of external world problems that don't actually really matter. Money is mostly man-made. It's supposed to simply represent what you earn through your labor, through your work. We've turned it into this complex system. It's not really all that complex. in its basic nature, which is just trade and ownership and property, and it's very basic. But of course, we turn it into a whole bunch of different things. And people don't think that there's accountability measures within nature that people will automatically reason to understand. There is, and that's why socialism, communism, capitalism, all these isms basically have value somewhere. Otherwise, people wouldn't follow them or see them as beneficial in any scenario. If they're beneficial in any scenario, then there is a time and place for it. There is a time and place for everything. There really is, and you have to see it with a different perspective, which is why I don't fit myself in any box, so I can see every single box that is out there. By placing myself outside of one box, I can see the millions of boxes, per se. And you may say, because I'm looking at nature, which is this circle that's basically surrounding all the boxes, and no box can fulfill that circle. So what about the golden rule? Okay, so I need to get clear on what you mean by morality, right? This is what happens in conversation with politics. They want to trap you and ask you questions and keep getting more information out of you so they can find somewhere to attack you on. This is the problem. This is what they do in debate classes and such, trying to find weaknesses and trying to find where could I jump on you. Like it's not a game, but people make it out to be. So the golden rule, it doesn't really matter either. Yes, okay, naturally people will do things to others that they don't want done to themselves. This is just a natural phenomenon. And so it's not really that concerning to me. What's concerning is people making exceptions and saying, well, violence is okay in this scenario. Theft is okay in this scenario. No, it isn't. Okay, especially done in an organized way, and people who are given special rights over others, rights that don't exist, or claiming that they have more rights than other people. That is just basic inequality. So again, it's a moral issue, and that morality is basic and everybody can understand it. So golden rule, karma, there's a billion other terms for it, and every religion in the world talked about it for the very same reason that basically it's within our human nature to not do something usually to others that we know is going to be harmful to us, at least if we have empathy and care for them. So again, that goes along the lines of reasoning. Is your reasoning able? Is it not? Again, you just fall back to the same answers of morality, talking, reasoning, conscience, etc., which is why I talk so much about it on my channel, natural law and all these different topics. Now, when it comes to putting me in a box, I have a special term for these type of people who like to put people in boxes and trap them to say, well, have you heard of this philosopher? Well, what about this philosophy? Oh, your philosophy has been debunked by this philosophy. I call these people under the term of limited philosophy. I've had to think about this term for a while. I'm like, what do I call these people that overanalyze the world? And they're not even overanalyzing. They're basically just semantically conceptualizing the whole world under what they think philosophy is based on what they heard about philosophy and the things they know about philosophy. And so they have this expectations. They'll watch videos, they'll look into books, and they'll have expectations based on the philosophy that they currently know. And so they set traps. They want to set traps. And some people, they straight up just want to cause arguments and debates and talks for hours long because they're bored. And some people admit to it. They just want to be the contrarian because for them that is the fun position to be in, is to challenge every worldview, and they think that's actually productive, is to be the contrary to every single person out there. But here's the big thing. Contrarians don't want to be teachers. They don't want teachings. They're not open to new information because they're always trying to find a flaw with it. Now, I'm okay with challenging things. I challenge everything as well, and I wouldn't accept anything. But that being said, I'm not going to say, well, my philosophy then is limited to this or that. I talk about nature is the answer. I talk about natural law, and I'm still willing to expand past those realms of philosophy, because it is a philosophy, and say, well, it's not just like this, it's not just like that, and people want to put everybody in boxes. I'm not here to do that. So when you see me talking with people, I never want to say, you're this, you're that, or, oh, so you follow this, oh, so you follow this, or you don't know about this, or you... It's not about that. For me, it's about reasoning with people. That's why most of my videos, I don't care about how much evidence, per se, I present to you. I care more about the perspective. I look at you as a fellow human being. I can only look at you so much. I'm looking at a camera right now. But I look toward the heart within you, the reason within you, and I try to find that. because that is where our humanity is found. When we're looking at books and things of the past, which we don't even know really exist, or who wrote it, or what translation, or etc., and there's billions of that, there's a question to which, what are you creating rather than following? Are you creating anything? Are you teaching? Are you willing to learn? Is there a learning or a teaching involved in the process, and not just, well, here it is, this is that? It's not that simple. There has to be a level of work involved in both participants, the teacher and the responder, the student. And we're all students. Our learning is never finished. Okay, and that's another thing in politics where they don't really talk a whole lot about philosophy. So everybody's kind of in their own bubbles. You got the philosopher people over there, and they tend to get in trouble with politics for good reason. And then you got the political people who want to stay away from philosophy because to them it's a waste of time. That's also for pretty good reason. We need to understand both these parties and real parties, and understand where they come from. Because I think they do have a value, and there is an integration to be made. But it could be made in simplistics, which I talk about as this sort of bridge that can help really unite a lot of people, is rather than taking this complex view of, did you study Kantian ethics? Oh, Aquinas ethics. Oh, Aristotelian ethics. Oh, let's look at aristocracy. Oh, plutocracy. A republic, a democracy. It's like it just goes on forever, basically. And at the end of the day, you have to look at the nature of those things. They're all ideologies. They're all based on whims. People still get to be in positions of authority. Those are the base natures that you want to look at and say, well, is there more than to see? Now, there's people who will say, there will always be positives and negatives to these philosophies. So if you're saying, well, okay, I'm talking about how the world needs to be free, and it needs to be free from, those who are basically promoting slavery, as it says in my book, my book as well. The shirt as well says, free by nature, slaves by government. I'm saying that people are slaves by people who are slave masters, but how does that happen? And I talk about how, well, we're promoting our own slavery through mental slavery, through a thing called statism. This is a very big theme among my works, because I say statism is that one thing we really have to focus on. It's that one thing that a lot of politics leaves out, because guess what? All of politics includes it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be politics. Again, unless, it's some sort of social thing, which then I don't consider that politics. Now, again, you have different things, expectations, but when it comes to positives and negatives, they're going to say, well, there's good and bad to anarchy, there's good and bad to government. This is just natural, right? There's good and bad in everything. Well, okay, so do you want slavery of the past? Did you look at the chattel slavery of the 1800s? Did you say, well, the slave trade, provided benefits? Oh, it has some downfalls, but, the benefits outweigh the downfalls, and no talk about morality. Because at the end of the day, it is a two-way street. If you're going to treat someone with respect or not. If you're going to harm them or not. These are choices we make within our day-to-day lives, and we need to understand those choices. And when it comes to mass slavery of the mass public, there is no positive or negative to slavery. Slavery is inherently negative, because it is degrading the nature of another individual. It's putting them under the ownership of another individual, which that individual does not properly own. Nobody properly owns another human being. And you say, well, what is properly? What is morality? Again, ask yourself these basic questions. Is violence wrong? Is involuntary interactions wrong? And you understand that slavery still occurs in today's world and in many different forms, not limited to chattel slavery. That's why my shirt says what it says, and why I've written a book about it called Slavery Gone for Good. Gone for actual good, for morality. And then some people will say, they'll say this other thing, oh, but people have to be moral. Okay, exactly. You have to put in work into it. It's not that people have to be perfectly moral. You can't expect anybody to be perfectly moral. Since when is anybody perfectly moral? That's the whole reason why we shouldn't have certain people claiming to know what morality is and then imposing that upon everybody else, or even majority rule, because then you still have involuntary interactions, you still have violence backing those laws which are never universal and eternal. So there's problems there, inherent problems to those actions. And those actions we have to look at. And so when we look at people being moral, it's not so much we have to do that, but the actions being moral. And exactly, we need teachings, because in order to know what to do, you have to know what to do. So you have to have knowledge. That requires teaching, that requires work. But who wants to put in the work? I don't know. Philosophers and politics don't want to talk about teaching. So again, looking at both sides, there's problems, there's good things, there's bad things, yes. But when it comes to slavery, which is an action, it's wrong. When it comes to violence, which is an action, it's wrong. And so when you say people have to be moral for a free world to work out, exactly. And who is going to be the ones to help create that change? It starts with you. It starts with I. It starts with everybody understanding what morality is, which is why I talk about it, but also understanding that there's people who are exempt from everyday morality. And how come they get the exemption? Because we give it to them. Again, this goes into the idea of mental slavery and statism, which I talk about extensively in my works. So, I'm not trying to be special. That's a big thing about this too, is just because I'm saying I'm not going to fit into this box or that box, I'm not trying to be special. I don't have an ego or an identity attached to this matter. It's the whole reason why I don't have a political title, etc. And I purposely use the word abolitionist to get people questioning, to spark a level of surprise, because people don't usually use that nowadays, and it directly talks about what we're doing and the action, not just the philosophy of freeing people from slavery. So that's why I particularly use it, and I think it could be effective as a means for that, but otherwise, I'm just a human being, right? Just as you are. Even if you want to decide to title yourself, ultimately that's your choice. But does it really help if people make generalizations the first time they come across you and what you say you represent? So another thing too, right, is so people want to use the word anarchist to represent a free world. I rather use abolitionist. I have videos about this. You can check it out. Tolkien was, an anarchist. And the abolitionists of the past, of the 1800s, as I detailed in my book, a lot of them were anarchists, and people would be surprised to hear that, and they think anarchy is this bad thing, but Tolkien was. I mean, this guy was a writer of many books talking about this whole scenario of good versus evil, which his books clearly outlined, but he also understood how human reason was, how it could be tempted by evil, and that's why he introduced this material ring, the One Ring. And so if you're interested, I also did a presentation on my channel called Lord of the Rings Dethroned, where I do 4 hours of basically looking through Tolkien's journals, his movies, and basically looking at the themes in his own quotes as to what, how he observed the world. And it really correlates with not only the things he portrayed into the movies and in the books, which were fantasy per se, but they have a lot of truth. They have a lot of validity in them, because there's truth everywhere. And there's always something that inspires us to create something. We refer to people who don't think properly as zombies. Oh, they're just following the crowd. We think of people who just follow sheep, right? They follow the herd, and they don't think for themselves as sheep. They're not human beings anymore. We degrade them into a different essence. These fantasies and stuff will always exist, and it's good. It's a spark of creativity, but we also need to still be in touch with reality. Okay, and so, perhaps it's the movies that also influence us and starting to create these titles and images and egos. But anyways, we got mental slavery, which is also talked about from Marley, from Gandhi, and the abolitionists as well. This just shows you that I'm not the only one with these views, right? There's people who were respected of the past who had these views. I mean, you had people like Leo Tolstoy, who wrote poems, was known as one of the greatest writers of all time, and he was an anarchist, right? Christian anarchist. And that doesn't even matter. And these people sometimes didn't even title themselves. The Wikipedia puts it on there for them, right? Based on what some people view them and their views as. But I think that's kind of sad, because then people will look at that and think, oh, okay, so that's his views. That makes sense. They try to make it easier. It doesn't really make it easier. It kind of just skips the specifics and skips you from wanting to learn more about that individual and what their views actually are. Okay, now, a first impression that people might talk about, like when they come across these works. This is very important because people might look at me, they might look at the people I'm associated with, the organizations, etc. They see this phrase perhaps, government is slavery, right? I don't say that, I say slaves by government, but it's basically the same thing. Well, government is slavery. Is government not the claim of ownership over your life or property? That's my question to you. And you really got to ask yourself these questions, and don't just come up with an answer right away. Say, oh no, like, okay, sit down, evaluate it. Is that true? I have a whole list of questions that I have in my videos that actually helped me to understand a lot of this knowledge. I'm going to put that on the screen for you so you can see those questions. I think these questions are really powerful when it comes to understanding what rituals we take within our own life. And by rituals, I'm not meaning magical rituals necessarily. I mean things that we partake in, with other people. And we have to keep in mind that what we partake in with other people contributes to the whole of society. So you want to understand your contracts, apparently. You understand what you're signing up for, what knowledge you have, what you bring into this life. And I'm here to bring something special. I'm here to provide different perspectives. I'm here to spark a little bit of action. I'm here to see what I can do. I like to experiment. And so that's what I do. I don't put myself in boxes, so it allows me to better do that. It allows me to also reach out to more audiences and to also understand different audiences if they per se are leftist or conservative, etc. They can better understand me and probably be more likely to talk to me upon first meeting. Although, if that's somebody's impression is that, oh, I don't want to talk to you if you're this or that, then that's probably not a person worth your time anyways. Now, another first impression is, what about mental slavery? And why do you use this word statism? Again, I said statism is mental slavery. You have to ask yourself, what gives someone the right to rule? And again, this goes back to morality. And the reason why it goes to morality is because you have to ask yourself, well, what does that mean? What does that mean, right to rule? Even if you don't believe in this whole idea of rights, you have to look at the reasoning behind it. What gives someone that ability to say, hey, I'm in charge? And you say, well, other people with their voluntary permission. Okay, but what about the people who don't want to voluntarily be a part of that system? They have to obey. Is that their societal obligation? What if they don't obey? Is this system perfect within itself? Like, can it ever be perfect? Why do they always fall? What is democide? Do we know what that is? It's the #1 cause of unnatural death. Should we be concerned? Well, there were millions of deaths in just the last century. Just the last century. That should concern us greatly. Especially since we have so many climates nowadays where war might be a potential, where slavery is ever becoming apparent. Because slavery and war go hand in hand with one another. When there's slavery, there comes every other vulnerability. I say this within my book. Very, very important notion to understand. Now, another first impression is, it is not government if... Okay, it is not government if. This is another thing I always have to address, okay, because people want to say, well, without this, without that. Oftentimes they confuse government with society. And I want to make it clear that government, like I said, is violence, it's slavery, it's imposing your will on others. If it's voluntary, it's not government. If it's people just working together and there's no violence, it's not government. Okay, and people like Elon Musk have said things about this, how government is a monopoly on violence. Yet, we don't really hear much about that, right? Even though he's a public figure, and there's a lot of public figures who've said it. You've got institutes talking about how government is this organized monopoly on violence. So it's not only violence, but it's a monopoly, and it's also what creates a lot of monopolies and creates all these different imbalances. But a lot of people don't want to look at that, and they want to equate society with government and say that they're basically one and therefore government is natural, the same way people said slavery was natural because it was a way of part of life, where it's like, well, without the roads, well, without, who will build the cotton, who will pick the cotton, who will build the roads. This is the same arguments, just used over and over again, and we see the events of history just repeating itself. And that's what we want to prevent. And the only way we prevent it is by getting past these barriers to say, well, what if political ideologies don't work for us anymore? What if there's more to that? Because every political ideology, by its nature, is not looking at morality. It's not looking at what humankind needs to do. And yet the question, well, how did we get rid of chattel slavery? It was a moral cause. Morality did it. It wasn't the war that ended it. That was a front. The government used that. They wanted to stay in control. They say, hey, well, our citizens are happy now. They got what they wanted, but they still are under political slavery, commercial slavery, economic slavery. They introduced taxation. But, oh, don't look at that and don't call it slavery. It's not slavery. This is what goes on in people's heads, and I just want them to think about it a little bit. To say, well, okay, government's just a corporation, they'll say. Well, it's not just any corporation, it's the biggest corporation, and it has a monopoly on violence. And since when is violence ever good? How could violence bring us good? Shouldn't we learn from our 6,000 years of experience in slavery and government? Because government, the first government of which was the first form of slavery, did you know that? But a lot of people don't know that. You see, online, this is where it gets very tricky, because I produce a lot of videos online and I may talk to people online. The thing is about online is that people can't avoid your questions. I may ask a question about morality. I might ask a question about what gives people more rights. I might have asked that question about government and say, well, is government not the claim of ownership over your life and property? And I won't hear a response online. They'll direct to something else. But if I was in person and I asked this question and they were trying to avoid it, I could look them straight in the face, in the eyes, and ask them, and they might get uncomfortable. But that makes a difference, because online they can distract themselves. They can go on their phone. They can do all these things to try to get their mind off of it, because it's uncomfortable to face those truths. It's uncomfortable. I don't expect you to accept them either. I'm here to open the debate. If you are willing, if you are human, and care that there might be slavery happening today. And so that's what I look for. If you care, you look into it. That's been my credo of how I came to this knowledge, and I hope it would be yours too. I'm not looking for you to agree with me. I'm looking for you to look into this knowledge. This knowledge is not limited to me or my beliefs. My beliefs are irrelevant. I'm looking at basic morality that you know and evaluating things that we all do and all know. So we should all be able to understand it through our own lens and be perfectly fine with it once we do. But that's the thing, we have to confront it. If you don't start the path and go all the way, you're not going to get anywhere. So you need to make that definitive for you, or for yourself. Am I going to look into this? Okay. Am I going to look into that? Let's say you have a problem with your health, right? Oh my gosh, I have this liver issue, a kidney issue. Am I going to do research on it? Am I going to find a doctor for it? Am I going to take the time and dedication to do what needs to be done for my health? Well, that's the same about this world. If you care about this world, you need to do the same exact thing. What knowledge is going to help lead me in the right direction to help me understand what I also need to share with others once I acquire it for myself and find it important, if I find it important. And I hope you do, because I'm not doing this stuff on my channel just for clicks or just for my own identity. Like I said, I'm doing this because I think it's actually important. You know, I'm not just in politics because I think some person over there needs to run for office, so I gotta help them. No, I'm doing my own cause for the whole world. I'm not doing it for some select country, and I'm not doing it for myself or for somebody else. This is something we're all together on, and that's why I create a movement. That's why I create a book that you can share and teach. That's why I share a bunch of materials that I want you to look over and questions to ask yourself, because I'm not here to impose. I'm not here to tell you what to think. All I can do is help you in how to think, and simply share as a fellow human being what I have come across as an individual, just like you, in a different environment. So in person, however, like I said, compared to online, people must be confronted with the questions many times. And with enough urgency, it is possible to start to realize that, wait, maybe I could be wrong. Maybe there is something I'm not looking at. And that's what I look for in you. If you're somebody who's new to my channel and you don't know what exactly I'm talking about, well, I had no clue exactly what I was talking about, what I'm talking about right now, just a couple years ago. I did not know that. I did not know anything about statism. I didn't know anything about natural law. But these things are very real phenomena that we need to understand if we put the time into it, if we put our reasoning into it. See, and another problem too is someone will say, well, what about in front of an audience? Can you give a demonstration in front of an audience where you talk to somebody who's a statist, somebody who believes in the legitimacy of government, slavery, and prove to us that it's slavery in front of somebody who thinks it's not? Well, here's the problem. There's pressures, there's expectations, and talking to them is not as natural because it's in front of an audience. So I will not do that. So there's certain things I won't do. I won't also join debates, because if you're in a debate, by definition, you have to be going against another individual, and people think, well, he won, no, he won, this person won, and people don't really get much out of it, as opposed to simply a conversation. So I wouldn't use the word debate. Does it get clicks? Does it people like watching it? Sure. Could you use it and maybe spin it in the right direction? Possibly. But is it really productive? Is it what society really needs? No. Society needs to sit down with their own conscience and understand the world that they live in, because they in part create it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I made my political beliefs clear, and I think it would frustrate someone that I give so many times the answer of it's irrelevant, it doesn't matter, and sorry, can't fit me into this box, because they want that. It's an expectation that they have, and they're so used to it because everybody in society does. And I'm sorry to tell you, but I simply don't, because I embrace the uniqueness that I am as a human being in this life. Thank you very much. Corey Nature is the answer.